welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome to the program two gentlemen. It's almost becoming an annual affair with us now. Two gentlemen where that I'd like to introduce and get into a general discussion of the conditions in the world and that sort of thing. And if I may, on my far left is Ramsey Clark, who was, of course, former Attorney General of the United States and is a leading light in terms of representing just and appropriate causes within the broader world scene. And Ramsey Clark, it's an honor to welcome you very, very much to Conversation.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
And my immediate left is Ali Treki, the friend and ambassador to or representative to the United Nations from the country of Libya. And once again, Ali Treki, welcome very, very much to Conversation. Last year, if we could, perhaps Dr. Treki, we said how you felt as a representative of Libya and in a certain sense a representative of a country that is well informed in terms of representing Africa and the African expression, some third world expression in the world, and at the United Nations, how you felt, perhaps personally, your country felt, and those people of the world felt about the fact that Mr. Bush had just been inaugurated President of the United States. We might ask you now, in light of the developments, and particularly the invasion of Panama, which was carried out more recently, and Mr. Bush is now very, very high popular ratings among the American people after 1 year, more or less, of his administration. I wonder generally, how do you feel after 1 year of his administration, in a broad general sense, about how his administration has acted and how the United States has conducted itself under his administration here in this interesting and precarious world of ours?
Well, we were in the opinion that in that time that there will be some change in this administration concerning foreign policy. We were not expecting really major change, but we were expecting at least certain change in style. But certainly this year was very important year. A lot of change all over the world.
Certainly.
Things going so fast in every part of the world. In Africa, we have seen now a lot of events going on, like the independence of Namibia, the liberation of Nelson Mandela, and other. Also, we have seen what we're looking to what's going on in the Eastern Europe. We see a lot of change, very quick change. And it's very hard sometimes to follow it.
Yes.
As far as concerning the change, I can't see really any real change in the policy of this administration. It's the continuation of the previous one. You yourself, you mentioned Panama now. It is really a very regrettable accident. And it was condemned by the United Nations. We don't really see it as a case to defend a man. Noriega belongs to the Panamanian people to decide his destiny, to be there or not. But the fact that any country is not happy with the leader of another country, they decide to invade. This will create a really very dangerous precedent in the world.
Absolutely, and
international policy.
I intend to get, if I get a good explanation from Ramsey Clark, one of our leading international lawyers, about what the rationale is. And I suppose much of the world is trying to understand it, that the indictment that was handed down, or was in an American court, and I wonder if there wasn't, as it seemed to me, again, I keep asking these incongruous questions. Last year it was, how could we possibly have bombed Libya, and these questions, and in light of international law. But in the case of Panama, it was an indictment by American courts, and what does it say? That an American court could pass an indictment on another country and invade that country, bring the person away from that based on their indictment. And what does it say about the international law, and what does it indicate? That the United States could have so blatantly, in a certain sense, which seems on the surface of it, violate international law in that invasion of Panama, and then be so widely approved by the American people. I mean, maybe you could help address that if you could.
Well, the indictment was returned several years before the invasion.
Yes.
And laid as a threat all that time. we saw the same thing with Grenada. Before the invasion of Grenada, there were threats for a couple of years, and you never knew whether or when there would be an actual attack. It's you could call it a form of judicial imperialism. In other words, extending our claim to judicial power worldwide. So if there's an offender in your country or over here on this continent that displeases us, we can indict here and try to reach. You may recall President Reagan in December of '86 signed an executive order authorizing kidnappings overseas for the purpose of bringing people back to the United States to try them.
But that would bring back American citizens?
No, it's bring back anybody.
Bring back anybody.
You look at the people who, there have been 6 or 7 brought back that way, and their one famous incident was a person lured out into the water off of Crete and then picked up by helicopters and gunboats out there in international waters, you might say. But there have also been efforts to take people right from homes in their countries. You don't need to be a lawyer to know that is lawless,
yes,
and also to know that it's chaos. I mean, if every country claimed the right to arrest anybody anywhere, then we would have clashes potentially between armed forces, police forces, any place on earth. I decide to get the leader of your country. I decide to get this business person or whoever it is that's displeasing me over here, this colonel or whatever it may be. So
what does this fabric of international law tell us? Or what does that tell us about the fabric of international law? That the greatest power or the great power in the world would, with the responsibility of the administration and what they carry, would carry out such a lawless act. I mean, what does it tell us?
Well, the greatest powers in history have never sought international law. They've sought the domination of their own law, a Pax Romana. It didn't suggest that you would have, a generous democratization of government and political power. It meant that we will dominate. So it's countries and peoples without power that have needed international law. The United States has pretty systematically flaunted international law. And worse than that, used it hypocritically. When Iran was holding U.S. embassy personnel hostage in Tehran, the United States went to the International Court of Justice, sought to invoke its jurisdiction to compel Iran to release the hostages. On the other hand, when Nicaragua went to the International Court of Justice to complain about U.S. agents committing acts of violence, the mining of Corinto Harbor and other things, actual agents, not surrogates, not contras that you're motivating and financing and training, but actual CIA agents mining a harbor where a boat can have the bottom blown out and people be killed in the blast and drowned in the water.
Absolutely,
When Nicaragua went to the International Court of Justice to make what had to be a claim under any theory of right or law or justice, and certainly a valid claim under international law, and certainly within the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice, the United States said no jurisdiction. We won't participate. Yeah, we won't recognize this at all. So it's a use of it's a vision of law as a means of power, not as a practice of equity or principle among equal participants in the world scene. It's a tragic thing to see. It always has to involve, the bombing of Libya is as powerful an illustration as you could have, the invasion of Grenada. It always involves excuses. In Grenada they say, well, we had medical students. The truth is, as a matter of fact, the medical students were never endangered, and we know that. The dean of the medical school said they weren't endangered. We didn't even know about a second campus for 48 hours, and the students went on cutting on cadavers and jogging for exercise or whatever they were doing.
It'd be funny if it was a tragic.
Yeah. In Panama, we had this elaborate demonization of Noriega to make him seem an ultimate evil.
Yeah, we need that focus of
You need
evil.
that. You need it in war. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to demonize or dehumanize an enemy so you can want to kill them and desire to kill them. And then we said it's all drugs, which is an awful hypocrisy. The worst part is that people are willing to believe it, because if Panama had never existed, if it wasn't on the map, the drug situation in the United States would be essentially the same, and I think everyone knows it. And the leadership that the United States has installed as the government of Panama today has as many, if not more, and the same sort of drug connections that have been alleged as against Mr. Noriega. So you use this.
Laundering goes on.
The laundering goes on, and the drugs go on because there's a demand here for it. Tragically, so it's an hypocritical use of force for domination. The real meaning of the invasion of Panama was that there'll be no sovereignty there except the sovereignty of the will of the people of the government of the United States.
Yeah, and Libya certainly experienced that. And if I may, Libya experienced with the bombing of that. And we've been myself to the home of your leader Muammar Gaddafi, saw the bedroom where his adopted daughter Hannah had been killed by our bomb. I've talked with family of a young woman who had come from London, a beautifully, delightfully advanced artist, had come to visit and had been killed by the bombs of the United States, which fell on Tripoli, and that sort of thing. And this after having systematically built up disinformation, leaking distruths about that country, false rumors of hit squads that supposedly were in this country, constructing almost out of whole cloth a fictional kind of scapegoating view that so much of the sycophant press went right along with, and the American people against the country of Libya. And it goes on that we will do these sort of things in order to scapegoat or to have, as you put it before, some sort of demonized enemy against which we can direct our supposedly just wrath. You've suffered that. Has that diminished at all? Has the relationship become more rational between the two countries? Or how do things stand as far as Libya, and from your perspective, is concerned, as far as the United States is concerned? Is there any improvement? Have there been improvements? And how are we to see this?
Well, I can say there is stagnation really. There is no
Stagnation.
improvement. It's not worse, but it's not better also. Things were not improved, and from our side we said we will maintain the same way. But we have no any objection in having a normal relation with the United States, and we do not clap only with one hand, two hands to clap. And till now I think the response from the United States government is not positive, in spite of the efforts by leadership and by our country. And they renewed the sanction for another 1 year.
They have?
Yeah. Which we was not really expected from the other side, not only from our side, but from the world in general. That would be what this will change now, even between the relation between the two major powers, that this will lead to be done all over the world, but it seems that is not the case, neither in the Middle East, where we see the same position of the United States concerning the Palestinian problem, or concerning the Libya and the U.S. relation.
They've renewed the sanctions against Libya that have made it difficult for travel and social, economic, intellectual intercourse between the two countries, unfortunately. Scholars want to have contact and so forth. They've done that. Have you had discussions with people, if I may, and I don't want to have to go into the details of it, have there been discussions at an official level with the American government and the rationale for that? Or did it just come down in a decree form? Or how does that work, that they so isolate you and your country and your country's representatives here in terms of the relationship to the American society?
Well, I know it is really not logical, it is not justified. It's a policy thing that is disadvantage on both sides. Even the Americans are losing a lot, knowing, as I said, I repeated that the volume of trade between the two countries before the sanction was around more than $4 billion with the interest of the two countries. We used to have around 4,000 students here studying in this country, which is a good link between the two countries, which have been reduced to a few dozens of students in finishing the studies. So I don't think that the continuation of this relation between the two countries is the advantage of anyone.
It continues. And as you say, the events that have been going on, the events in Eastern Europe, the initiatives or the leadership or the following role or in whatever sense, but certainly a dynamic role that Mr. Gorbachev is exerting in the world and the dynamic of Eastern Europe, the new opening on that. Many people in this country are triumphantly saying the West has won the ideological struggle against the socialist communist critique or dialectic, against the Western capitalist model and so forth. Francis Fukuyama has declared the end of history, that the ideological struggle is over, the Cold War is over. There are many of these kind of indications that have happened since you and we spoke last year, but the Middle East continues. The Middle East continues to be a point of great tension. The Palestinian-Israeli question is one, and the broader relationship that in large degree grows out of that Palestinian-Israeli conflict with the Arab world perhaps continues, and we've continued to try and have a sense of scapegoating and finding an enemy against which we can in a certain sense direct our if you understand what I'm saying, drugs might be one that's going to emerge, but the Arab world, the Muslim world, and the clash between the Arab and the Israeli expression is one which is still seen in dialectic terms as an enemy against which we have to direct ourselves. Do you feel perhaps it's a...
Well, as I said, there is no any real change. Certainly the change all over the world. I think the return between the two major powers was the process of liberalization going on in the eastern part of Europe, and even I can say in South Africa. But as far as the Middle East, there is no real change. We have seen the unconditional support of the United States to Israel is going on. The Intifada is going on. The killing of children in the occupied territory is going on. The United States used in the last few months veto 3 times in the Security Council to prevent any resolution of condemnation or stop that Israel stop this killing of massive killing of the children and the Palestinian people. So we can say I think the situation is worse now, because we see this massive immigration of the Soviet Jews encouraged by the United States, financed even by the United States.
Officially financed by the United States?
Well, they don't say officially, but I think most of the money coming from the United States. They are helping the immigration in Israel, but no one can prevent the Israeli from using this money in the settlement in the occupied territory.
No, in fact, Mr. Shamir said we need a bigger Israel in order to accommodate.
See this recently also the United States, I think they limited their quota of the Soviet to help or to pressurize the Jews to go to the occupied territory. There is no other way.
Which would reinstate or reinforce the Likud or the right wing's attention, and you still feel it's their intention, and as you sense things geopolitically and so forth, the intention of the effective leadership in Israel to maintain control over Hebron and the occupied territories and the view of a greater Israel is Israeli policy and will, in politically realistic terms, be maintained as such as far as you read things from the United Nations and your colleagues? Or is there a peace now movement, a movement within Israel itself or the broader world community that might become effectively moving toward a two-state solution or some solution?
From the Palestinian side, we can see, since the meeting in Algeria, I think they are ready, they recognize the 242 treaty, they are ready for direct negotiation, they have done what they have been asked. I think they have gone so far to recognize directly Israel. They're ready to go to peaceful meeting. They accept even certain proposal from the United States, what's so-called the 5 points and 10 points of the administration. But from the Israeli side, we see total refusal to discuss with the Palestinians, to recognize them, and asking more settlement. That means we'll have more refugees from the Palestinians. in the neighboring country, and more land recuperated from the Palestinians. So there is no really any hope. And even the 5 points proposed by the Secretary Baker, and which also Egypt have accepted it, is the Israeli try to delay it. They didn't want any conference or even triangle conference.
And so that's a reading of things the way a lot of people see that. You agree with that? I wondered, Mr. Clark, that still is perhaps a really touchy area of the world, what with the atomic weaponry and so forth?
Well, there's no question that the Middle East remains a tinderbox, as we say, a very dangerous place. There's no question that Israel continues to use maximum means of repression over Arab peoples within Israel and Palestinian peoples worldwide, here in the United States or wherever they happen to be. I haven't seen any diminishment in what I consider to be a consistent long-range policy of the State of Israel since 1967 to permanently occupy these territories and ultimately try to incorporate them. They're under a lot more pressure now. You see a radicalization in their leadership, just as you were seeing a radicalization and continue to see a radicalization of white Afrikaner leadership in South Africa as things get more tense. So it could change quickly. I think the Palestinian leadership, the PLO, has been as open and generous as it could be under the circumstances.
Yes.
It's under tremendous strain. They've declared their state. They've recognized 242. They are prepared to go forward with a two-state solution, and I think it'll happen. I think it will not happen easy, and I think Shamir, Sharon, and much of the militant leadership of Israel will resist it as long as they can, but it's inevitable. I would caution against the idea that there are very few problems left in the world except the Middle East. Southern Africa remains a terribly tormented place for all of the joy and exhilaration of the release of Nelson Mandela and the meaning of it in human terms, this tremendous character and dignity that he has manifested to the whole world after 27 years of imprisonment. But we ought to remember it was 1863 here in the United States when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and 100 years later we were still struggling for basic human rights here.
With our own apartheid.
With our own apartheid, and we still had the masses of black people living in terrible poverty, and they couldn't vote in major parts of the country, and they were discriminated against as a matter of law.
And we're still plagued with racism.
And we're still plagued with it, so there's no millennium there. The problems of poverty and hunger there, and worse than that, the manipulation. Central America remains a place of staggering and tragic turmoil and violence. The problems of Southeast Asia, East Europe, a unified Germany. I think the problems of the world and the opportunities of the world are at a fever pitch right now. The tragedy to me of the Bush administration is not just the wrongful acts that is committed, invading Panama and things like that, continuing to this day to manufacture 3 to 4 nuclear warheads with no suggestion of diminution in that production, firing on test range Trident II nuclear rockets last week when there's a hope in the world that we're going to overcome nuclearism finally and get that behind us, means of mass destruction. We continue that. But in a greater sense, the tragedy is not so much what it's done, as awful as some of its acts have been, but what it hasn't done.
Yes, indeed. It hasn't.
Why haven't we reached out at this time when the Soviet Union is trying under enormous internal pressures to stabilize things? Why haven't we reached out to try to help in East Europe, to try to help the Soviet Union? Why haven't we reached out in Southern Africa to try to help accelerate things in terms of democratization and human rights for all the people there? Why do we continue to support a government in El Salvador that kills priests and brutalizes its own people? Why do we have this terrible pressure on Nicaragua? Why are we condemning the election before it occurs and spending millions of dollars to corrupt the democratic process there? You can't spend one country's money in another country to affect democratic voting there and call that democracy, and yet we do that. It's these negative things that are worrisome. The world has plenty of troubles, and we have a high opportunity to make some headway if we will.
Yes.
We're still working very hard to demonize Libya, and it's tragic. I've seen in this year, Liberia is a country I've followed for many years. Liberia was the only American colony, you might say, in Africa, and the tragedy of Liberia is enormous. I mean, the infant mortality rate there, the illiteracy rate 70% probably, the poverty of the people, the concentration of economic power, and the violent struggle there now to overthrow the Doe government. And who is the United States blaming for it? Libya. Time and time again we have released the suggestion that it's Libya that's trying to overthrow the Doe government. Doe's a guy that came in there and destroyed the Talbot family, killed people, smashed into the French embassy to pull one of Talbot's, the former president's son, out of the French embassy in Monrovia, and strung the leadership of the country that we had supported, that had been educated at Howard University overwhelmingly in Washington, D.C., tied them to poles up on the beach in Liberia and let them melt in the sun, and then went up and executed them. And we've increased military aid to Doe tenfold, and now I think we're probably trying to subvert him because we want someone more dependable for our military needs. These are the real problems that we have to address.
Yeah, absolutely, that is. Mr. Reagan had as a basic, Mr. Jimmy Carter had tried to have human rights concern be the underpinning of his foreign policy philosophy, as it were. Mr. Reagan brought anti-terrorism to the fore. Perhaps the terrorist, as far as the Israeli question was concerned and so forth, we really need to begin to move beyond that. And you said earlier that despite Mr. Fukuyama saying we've come to the end of history and that we now, in this country, perhaps they're so busy having such a triumphant celebration of the success of the Western capitalist model that can be employed, that can be put upon the world, a kind of Pax Americana, as you said earlier, that much of the world would really be seeing that that Americana itself, or the United States, is in itself in a moral quandary in a certain sense. We have an economy that's very, very heavily concentrated in all of its ownership of all the capital assets, virtually limited to the upper 5% of our population in ownership. We have institutions that are administered by highly paid and necessarily sycophant high administrative officers to that ownership. We have a wage-slave, trickle-down traditional system that leaves increasing numbers of our people destitute on the streets over whom we walk, homeless people in our own country, and we don't have a vision that effectively allows us politically, economically, morally to resonate to the needs of the poorer or the underclass peoples of our own society, much less the peoples of the world. In a world that cries out for that kind of vision, we don't have it. And that's perhaps a broader question, because there's nothing more dangerous than a triumphant King Kong. There's a triumphant King Kong without a vision and a sense of positive identity. Perhaps we need that. And much of the world, the third world, the developing world, might very well, rather than seeing us as a triumphant giant, even in league with Japanese and other kinds of people who go along with us, don't see this necessarily as an advantage that this Pax Americana or Pax Western can be imposed upon the world, but they see it as a threat to their interest, or as a threat to their needs. That we need to have a sense of vision that can allow us to relate to the world, if you understand. Perhaps the people in the third world, perhaps in the African, Latin American, and so forth, see things differently, or the need for that kind of political leadership that unfortunately has not emerged from the United States. Or
well, the third world certainly they want this change. I'm talking about this line. We work very hard since after the last Second World War that had a certain coexistence between the two major powers, and we put ourselves as non-aligned countries to try to help promote peace and security in the world. But we have our own problems. I think we have a major problem which exists in our poverty. We have foreign debt, which is a major problem to us, and it seems there is no solution yet for this. And in spite of this big change I can see in the world, in the Eastern Europe in general, and the desire, the wish of the Soviet to put an end to these armed races and to try to solve the international problem, and we see from almost every week there is a new concession from the Soviet Union concerning disarmament and so on. There is no any real response or positive response from the United States.
No,
There's still the mistrust is going on, and still they didn't believe that this Treki is a reality, and that the Soviet, they want peace, and that there is no need really for more arms and to spend more arms.
Yeah,
I think they should spend money now in education, spend money on alleviate this foreign debt for the third world, hunger all over the world, in Africa, and most of the countries in the third world, they are suffering now. I think some of them were not able even to pay the interest for their foreign debt. Their exportation is less than the payment for their foreign debt, and they need help, especially in Africa. We see sometimes, they jump on certain one or two countries. They jump on Poland and Hungary for political reasons, more than economic, really.
Yeah.
And we see that they try to help maybe for their own reason, but not in the third world, in Africa, in Latin America countries. And I think if we have a new look to this situation, and that it is the war impossible now, and that we would like to work for peace, and they would like that other countries should be helped, I think.
Mm-hmm.
At least if we spend 2 or 3% from the money we are spending. Only the United States, their annual budget of defense is around $300 billion.
Yeah.
Can you imagine 5% from this amount of money spent in Africa to vaccinate 25 million African without vaccination, children in Africa. So how this is the impact of this?
We don't have a moral sense of, we're so taken up with our own greed, which is so in the saddle now in the United States, that we don't have a moral sense of that. And perhaps it diminishes us, I'm speaking now perhaps as American, diminishes us that we don't have that kind of a leadership that can allow us to be responsible.
The worry of the third world,
alienated.
Also that this detente, this between the two major powers, it might sometimes go against the interests of the small nation, the third world nation, in general.
Yeah, well,
you have a saying that you have an enemy sometimes. You need to have an enemy. And if you have not such enemy in the Soviet Union, they might have them in a small nation, like Libya or Grenada.
It could become a nasty, nasty open confrontation of the North-South, have not. It could become very, very nasty in a new dialectic. In a certain, the Marxists, at least, used to philosophically begin with the underclasses in their concern. But you understand what I'm saying? Do you think it's a problem, Ramsey Clark, the need that the developed country, in a sense, has to have some sort of a rapport or a feeling, or in our own interest, perhaps, to the poorer people of the world, if it were, or the developing world, or something? Or how do you see that? You've been in positions of great responsibility.
Well, we haven't demonstrated any commitment to our own poor.
Yes.
In the 60s, we had what we call the war on poverty, because war is how we know to solve problems.
We made some progress with
I
that.
thought we made
some things, that darn Vietnam War.
The main thing is we had a dream of eliminating poverty. It was a noble dream.
Indeed.
It was a highly desirable dream. It was entirely possible to do. It could have happened. And cynicism overwhelmed us. I think we made substantial progress in spite of the fact that we never really committed anything like the resources that would have been required. But when you read today that the death rate and life expectancy for the male black population in Harlem in this great city of New York and the heart of our black country, with all the poetry and dance and music and imagination and dream that's come out of Harlem. When you see that the death rate and life expectancy of black males there is the death rate is higher, the life expectancy lower than in Bangladesh.
Good Lord, is that a truth?
For the peer sample, you realize, and what are we doing? You know, we're flaunting our materialism all over the world when right in the heart of our city, where all these beautiful people live, death by disease, death by alcoholism and drug addiction, death by violence, death by malnutrition and hunger, takes more people than in Bangladesh in proportion to their populations. You see that we don't have that commitment. It's Pax Americana, like Pax Romana, is a euphemism. It wasn't a peace; it was a domination.
That's right. Yeah.
And the real risk, as I see it, between North-South now, is you get a powerful German economic engine going. You've got a powerful Japanese economic engine going, both capable perhaps of at least per capita outproducing the United States. The United States with military domination, particularly with the Soviet Union subsiding as a nuclear contender and threat, and you see the third worlds as major parts of your markets. You see already people, Poland saying only a war can change our boundaries. You think of Alsace-Lorraine, and you realize that we haven't settled the problems of World War I in Europe. We haven't satisfied people about boundaries and the possibilities of peace there. And you're going to have 1 billion more people on Earth in the remainder of this century, which is a pretty short period of time.
That's right.
And probably 80 to 85% are going to have darker skin, beautiful darker skin, be born in dire poverty. And you realize that the rich countries are prepared to practice triage over the lives of the poor countries and fight each other for contention in those markets. And it's going to be a wild time.
Yeah, and if I may, without being, and I'm not really fully familiar, but Muammar Gaddafi and the revolution in Libya and the ideology and the approach and the understanding that he has been attempting to enunciate in his revolution as it related to your country, and his view of the world, which has criticized in round and appropriate terms the capitalist model of the Western the United States, the capitalist model, as well as the Stalinist aspects of a communist model and so forth, took as his view a revolutionary need in the world for there to be concern with what he calls the masses, the Jamahiriya in the case of Libya, or the masses. But it has been attempting to establish, in a certain sense, a third view or a political expression that talks to some of these issues, or perhaps intervenes in some of these issues. Interestingly, intermediary between Europe and the broader African continent, interestingly as well, gives him attempting at a vision that could address some of these issues outside of the triage mentality that so much of the West is it seems unfortunately ready to work in terms of. Makes him perhaps at an ideological level, his view, one that is important, and I wonder if perhaps it is that potential ideological threat or vision that gives such opposition to him, perhaps by some knowledgeable people who see things in the world scale at State Department. Do you think it's a threat, or not a threat to the United States, or perhaps it's an important vision that greater numbers of people could understand what he's been attempting, and your nation has been attempting to do out of the very difficult history that your revolution grew?
Well, it seems that what's going on in the socialist country is quite clear. It's an indication that the Stalinism way of implementing communism, as you rightly said, is what was wrong one, and was not correct, and that people now there is such a reaction sometimes even against socialism as a way of life. And And certainly the capitalism is maximum good also is not a good way too. And that third way of life needed. We have a lot of models in this. We have socialism implemented in Sweden, for example.
Yes.
And this is a good example. The third also theory in Libya, which is also a good example of implementing something in the middle. As rightly said, that which are that workers should be partner, not wages.
They should be, it's interesting, they say workers should be not wage slaves, but they should be owners and partners in a profitable venture. It's an interesting thing because it does maintain the institution of private property, which is an interesting issue that many people, it can be a private property relationship there, which is an interesting ideological concept. But go ahead. Yes.
Well, it is,
also, you have these people's congresses who attempt at real democracy.
Congress, and also prove that state-run ownership have not worked. Also, the capitalism is maximizing owner by big lords. Also, it doesn't work. They look for the interests of some few individuals. So we need something in the middle as a and we start to implement this in our own country. To have this partnership instead of the state-run or state-owned industry or others, but not but owned by the workers. I can see also in the West some voice have been read recently. I think in Canada itself, Air Canada is now is proposed to be sold to the workers working there, other companies in the United States. I think it is all a voice raising everywhere now too. It's this change.
Well, it's raising. I would like to see it raise into an absolute choir or a vision that could give us a sense of that, because unfortunately in our country, again, and I don't know, Japan I'm not that familiar with, but the ethic of concentration of ownership and greed and this sort of thing, and wage slavery and these things continue, and it does usher in this. You're also very, very interestingly involved as far as the broader African situation is concerned. They're geographically well placed as far, and you've had a psychological and a political outreach in Africa that gives some system to which the African and perhaps the Latin and other Latin people can repair for a sense of how they can begin to move, rather than just necessarily accepting this Pax Americana, as we were talking about. We need to have some sort of an alternative systems to which peoples can repair.
Well, in Africa, in fact, we have a lot of problems. We have the problem inherited from colonialism. Africa is so divided into small, tiny states, and that none of them really can have any real development. And that we need to regroup. We're starting now to have so-called regional regroupment in Africa. North African countries, they have their so kind of federation. West Africa, also East African community was a good example, but which collapsed in the past, unfortunately. But still now Africa is so divided. And also the monopoly of big companies, this multi-corporation, is also still going on back in Africa, though most of the African countries, or all of them, gained their political independence, but economically they are still dependent completely on the West. In general, in their communication, in their economy. If you go to a country, sometime in West Africa, which is they have very fertilized land, they still import salad from France. They still depend completely on meat from France, from other Western countries. Even to travel from one African country to another, sometimes to travel from Cotonou in Benin to Lagos, 100 kilometers, you have to go through London or through Paris.
Yes, right, all the ways go
through. So we have a lot of problem in Africa.
There are many of these problems, but you're attempting to address them and so forth. And I mean, back again, if we could, maybe to the United States and Ramsey Clark, what do you see? We have, if there is this lack of leadership, we don't have one that can allow us to perhaps assume that really highly responsible role of providing philosophical leadership in the world in these precarious times and so forth. Do you see we have two parties? We have the Democratic and Republican. Do you see what do you see happening as far as appropriate change, finding appropriate procedure, and what do you see happening or being able to be done in terms of the alteration of the situation as far as the United States is concerned? If, in a certain sense, the United States, one doesn't like to see it that way. But the United States is seen by many people in the world not as its great liberator, but perhaps in many terms as almost as a legion threat on the horizon. What can we do in the United States to try and bring about change? Do you think third party, political activity, media activity? How do you think we might be able to best address bringing our own house in order, and so that we might be able to act more appropriately and responsibly in the world with the tremendous technological resource we do have?
Well, I would hope the people of the United States would not seek domination. If you look at our history of manifest destiny, as we've called it, the great American disease, which has been constantly one of territorial and economic growth and domination of others, we should really start looking toward international institutions to solve these problems. I think bilateralism is geopolitically designed for control. We've used it that way. If you look at Africa, and particularly sub-Saharan Africa for the next generation, you see a staggering human crisis.
Yes, sir.
In health, which we barely mentioned, but the potential ravaged by disease can equal the plagues of that we've seen in Europe and other parts of the world. The hunger, the inability of the continent to feed itself, basic things. We need a United Nations food bank that can plunge in. It's not dominated by one country that's trying to control Liberia or trying to control Southern Africa, maintain triangulate Africa from Israel to South Africa to West Africa and control the place.
While still not paying their due debt.
While still holding back on any contributions to the United Nations and all, because it's a threat to our domination and our power. I think the people need to, if we see the plight of hunger and sickness in Africa, I think we will tend to respond, and we'll see that the United States cannot unilaterally, because of the nature of our institutions or any government institutions, cannot unilaterally try to solve those problems. It must act through international organizations. I hope other countries, I hope the European community, I hope other organizations of regional groups, I hope the Organization of American States will exercise far greater independent power to say we have rights, we have sovereignty, we want equality, we want these matters resolved peacefully by international organizations. And then I hope the United States will have a spontaneous growth of independent political thought. The two-party system has not provided choice in our political process. We really have a plutocracy. Money dominates politics.
Certainly an economic plutocracy.
We have a political plutocracy because no one can deny that money dominates our politics.
That's right.
And through politics, government. And that is not democracy. We may have one person, one vote, but not half of us vote. The truth of the matter.
That's right.
And why should we? Because money is making the whole difference. You get your money onto television, and you persuade people who can barely recognize a name that this is the person to vote for. And that's not a meaningful democracy.
Yeah, it's not a real meaningful democracy. I wonder if maybe we would be well to think in terms of the fact, the media is increasingly controlled by the dominant media controlled by fewer and fewer people. I wonder if we might be thinking about the possibility of some alternate media possibility. We have a tremendous media capability. If there couldn't be, if not within a political party, but an alternate channel of some sort or something where if there are alternative solutions to the situation that we're in, we have historically inherited institutions which people are responsible to. There might be vision where it's difficult for them to work within those institutions. but a television system of consciousness raising, so much of it is a matter of television now, might be an appropriate thing for us to think about, sort of like a third party, but it's not a party, but it's a media mix where alternate views could find a saying, a hearing, if you understand. So that rather than the media only representing what the plutocratic establishment view is, there could be true alternative. Maybe Libya's views, maybe other people's views could be made available to Palestinian views, could be made available to the conscience of the United States. In the name of that alternative, third world views could be made available to the American people and try and reach them directly rather than trying to go through our laborious use of our institutions, if you understand. Much well to put attention on media.
Oh, absolutely. I think access to information is the best hope we have for a change in policies in the United States. But you need to begin with a new information order, a new world information order, which the United Nations has been working on, because right now, a new network, if you had one, first it's only one network, and second, what would its ratings be in terms of how would it compete with
probably be low at first,
comedies?
It could grow.
Well, look how slow it's been and tough for public television, and in fact how much intrusion of commercialism there's been into public television, and how inhibited it is.
But those are boxed in by commercial realities. They have.
But you need access to the information. You can't find out what's going on in Libya except with a major struggle. You can't find out what's going on in Panama. We don't know how many people we kill there. I can sit here and tell you we killed 4,000 people in our invasion.
Really?
And the State Department says, no, it's 202.
Yeah,
and the Department of Defense says 206. And we don't know. We've got to have a new information order that liberates facts so that the people can see the truth and then disseminates it.
Well, the dissemination of those facts and those new orders and view of things into this country could be done through a television system that those things could be available. If Mr. Gaddafi's views were available to the people in this country at the time of the bombing, people would have been interested in that, if there could have been. If we could get past the gatekeepers, they would say, those minds belong to us. If we could get past the gatekeepers in terms of the revealed sacerdotal truth or something with an alternative, it might be an effective way to reach the American, or give them an alternative to which they could repair, rather than the establishment truths that are so supposedly brought down from on high and just project status quo.
I think really the information is the major problem that we have. Certainly, the West control more than 80% from the mass media in the world, and this is one of the problems that we are discussing with the United Nations, how to improve the system of information in the world in general. And exactly what we were talking about, the popularity of the president depends on how the United States people can see the problem, have this problem presented to them. I still remember when the 56 war in the Middle East, I was a student in France in that time, and I still remember how the mass media presented the case when Nasser nationalized the canal, Suez Canal.
Yeah.
It seemed as it is a British canal, and Nasser nationalized it. Then they gave this image to the British and to the French. That's why the British and the French people, they react as something belongs to them and has been taken from them.
Yeah, right.
And also, this is the way that they represent the case of Panama, for example. Nobody defends Noriega as a man. He is their man. He is used to be CIA man, and he's working with them. And we are not keen about Noriega as a man. But the problem is that this is the country, the people.
Yeah,
so they show the image as if they went to Panama now to put an end to a traffic dealer, and it is not the case.
Yeah,
it's not the case.
It's the new demon. You know, and they're going to be able to go into all kinds of extra constitutionality things with their drug thing. That's going to be another thing. But this issue of the broader questions of the media and the information order, which is needed, and so is something that I would think is something that's really needed. We need this vision as far as
if there is any we are talking about the bombing of Libya, for example. There is no any evidence, and even when the BBC, for example, did some documentary, so-called the 12 Months over Tripoli, and tried to show this in the United States, no one of the major TV accepted to show it, because he gave evidence that is not true, and there is no evidence about the bombing.
Right.
And
Wow.
they show that as the bombing of Libya is a response to Rome or to Vienna. Massacre.
Or discotheque in Berlin, which was not the case, and it was part of an increased disinformation campaign that had been so characteristic
I mean,
of
Mr. Kalbay resigned as protest against disinformation campaign made by the United States.
That's right.
The reaction was very, very, very minimum.
I know. There should be more, and we need to have alternate visions, and we need to have alternate television community. I think increasingly the consciousness is shaped by the technology, the information order, and so it might be at that level that we could begin to think. It might be allow for some alternate ideas to be able to find their way into effective, first perhaps consciousness and effective policy, and come from the ground up and allow an information democracy, maybe lead to an economic democracy, and the kind of things that we need might go in that direction. If there are two people who help contribute to understandings that have us move towards some of the vision that we would be needing, while still vouchsafing and trying to protect the interests of those who are fighting for these things within the established system as it were. It's been you two gentlemen. I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming in and participating in this almost annual affair now here. And if I may, Ali Treki, Ambassador of Libya, and Ramsey Clark, former Attorney General of the United States, here at the office here in New York City now. Thank you very, very, very much for coming in. We invite you to tune in again next week. We've come to the end of the hour. We invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back then. And so once again, gentlemen, thank you very, very much for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night. We'll see you next week.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations 40 years ago, may not be a legally binding document. It is rather a promise made by all the members of the United Nations to the people of the world. We at Amnesty International believe that the governments who have adopted the Declaration have a moral responsibility to keep that promise.
Write Amnesty International, Post Office Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.
This may be the best kept secret in the world, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 40 years ago, the United Nations wrote and adopted it. Every single member country promised to support it, every single one. They also promised to teach, publicize, and display it. Have you ever heard of it? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
To get your copy, write Amnesty International, P.O. Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.
This may be the best kept secret in the world, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 40 years ago, the United Nations wrote and adopted it. Every single member country has promised to support it, every single one. They also promised to teach, publicize, and display it. Have you ever heard of it? To get your copy, write Amnesty International, P.O. Box 37137, Washington, D.C. 20013.